We find ourselves here in Europe at the crossroads when it comes to AI. Really good speeches before us, I have to say. Marcus, you already mentioned that the narrative seems to be that we're in a two-horse race dominated by the US and China for reasons we're all well aware of: scale, money, compute power, energy, and whatnot. But there's another discussion that is far less often highlighted, which is the difference between the UK and the EU when it comes to AI regulation and policy. We're very, very happy to be joined here by Matt, of course, who was partly the architect and designer of the UK's AI action plan. I would love to hear from you whether that characterization of the UK being more innovator-friendly when it comes to AI regulation than the EU is actually true. Does it hold water? And to avoid being into yes or no question, what do you think you got right in the UK that we can take lessons from here in the EU?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a big theme already tonight about the timing of participating in this technology transition. And, you know, my view is there is a gap that's emerging between the UK and the EU that's largely driven by regulation, but it's not too late. I think that'd be totally the wrong lesson, I think, to take from where we are. It's not too late for the EU. I think that, you know, I was lucky to serve both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer as their AI advisors. And, you know, we spent a lot of time, particularly in 2023 when the EU AI Act was being written, thinking about, you know, do we need to have our own? You know, like, is that, and the conclusion we reached was no. And the core reason for that was, I think when you look at the potential harms that AI can bring, and I wouldn't want to downplay those, I think they're real. I think we heard from the President of the Parliament a good list of them. Actually, the thing they have in common is they're already illegal. Financial scams are already illegal. It's already illegal to impersonate people for fraudulent purposes. It's already you know, illegal to mess with people's private data. And so, you know, our view was, do you really need another set of rules layered on top that says, oh, by the way, it's especially illegal if it's AI, or is what you really need to do equip your regulators to be savvy about what's happening with AI, how AI is changing the nature of those harms, and actually, more importantly, I think the scale of those harms, the repeatability of those harms. And our conclusion was, let's not create an extra burden for our startups and for our innovators. Let's actually empower our regulators. Let's fund them. Let's help them think about how they use AI in their work. And the reason I think that's so important is we've heard a lot, I think rightly tonight, about technological sovereignty, and that's largely been framed in terms of which companies do you have that are building. That's important, and actually it's at the heart of a lot of the work that we're doing in the UK, but I think it's actually less important than adoption. If you look at the history of technological revolutions, yes, the creators, the inventors capture some value, but by far the most value is captured by the adopters, by far, by an order of magnitude. So the real question is, will companies adopt? Can they adopt? And one of the biggest drivers of that is the rule set that they have to take into account in adopting fit for purpose. Does it actually reduce the friction to that happening? I think what we've done in the UK by saying there are no new rules, we're just going to help our regulators understand how the rules apply in the age of AI, we think that has allowed for faster adoption than we would have seen otherwise.
Yeah, I think the outcome is plain to see. In the UK has more unicorns, more investment into AI. The adoption is also up there. I think I saw a statistic in preparation of this panel that said enterprises in Europe, only 80% have not yet adopted AI in any way, shape, or form. So I want to hear from you, Alexander, representing the European internet industry with ECO. Do you feel that we have approached this the entirely wrong way, and instead, should we have followed the UK's example?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a yes or no question.
Avoid yes or no answers, but in this case, it's a very clear yes.
What could we have done differently, and can we still fix it?
Of course, because I'm also an optimistic man, but I'm also realistic, and that means for me, I see that we are just in the beginning of the digital transformation. Everything we are now discussing here as the big game between all the countries in the world is just the beginning of a digital revolution we've never expected before, and it's still time for all of us to be part of this. But it's really time for the European Union to understand that the last 10 years of digital regulation was completely leading us to this point where we all in Europe obviously feel a little bit uncomfortable. And we need, after this analyzing process, now a very clear process to change the philosophy, it was mentioned here, of regulation in Europe. And this has to start very fast now. And yeah, we started with digital omnibus or AI omnibus. Sounds good. It's kind of the right direction, but it's not fast enough and it's not consequent enough. Yeah, in the regulation for this, what is coming next.
Matt, you mentioned before this panel, you mentioned that you were in Brussels quite often a couple of years ago when all this was playing out, like how do we regulate AI? Do we do it at all? What are some of the lessons you took from being in Brussels at that time? Because it must have been quite eye-opening to see it from that perspective as well.
Well, I think I did an event in this building, and I remember someone on the panel being, well, of course, it's 2023, it's the year of AI, and I remember saying to them, so's 2024 and 2025 and 2026. And I think there's something about, it's very tempting, I think, and this is not specific to the European Union, but maybe particularly acute here. It's very tempting to sort of, and I've sat in the policymaker's seat and I've sat in the entrepreneur's seat. It's very tempting as a policymaker to just see things go by and be like, we've got to be relevant, we've got to do something on this. And it feels like sometimes the risk when you take that sort of regulation first approach is you see things and you just think, we've got to have an approach. Often I think actually the right thing to do is to say, what we really need to do is understand. And sometimes that means just watch and learn. I think the single thing that I'm most proud of that we did in the UK in 2023-24 was set up what's today called the AI Security Institute, which is not a regulator, but it is, I think, the greatest concentration of AI talent in any at least non-national security agency of government anywhere in the world. And what it does is it doesn't set rules for AI companies. It doesn't have any legal powers to do anything to AI companies. But what it does is it works incredibly closely with AI companies just to understand the capabilities of their models and systems. And as a result, the UK government went from having literally 0 AI PhDs in 2023 to I think about 70 now. And the capabilities of that group got to the point that when if you look, when OpenAI or Anthropic release a model, there's almost always a shout out to the AI Security Institute for helpful work that was done pre-release to understand the model capability. And so, I think the thing that I observe looking back, now with 2.5, 3 years distance is, I think the urge to react and to say, we've got a law, we've got a rule, is very strong. But sometimes, actually, the right urge is to say, we don't really understand this yet. We certainly don't understand it well enough to lay down in black and white today what all the rules that innovators 5 years from now will need to follow. So let's actually take a step back. Let's say that state capacity is as much about learning and knowledge and empirics as it is about rulemaking.
Very good insights. Thank you for sharing. Of course, the EU's rule-based approach, very precautionary, also has defenders. Like there's people pro that approach, and the words that we've already heard in the speeches that came before this panel, security, privacy, safety. Is there something to be said for the approach that the EU took in that regard?
I think it's not about one regulation. It's about the set of regulation we get offered by the EU. And if I talk to my members, it's always about, okay, what do I have to do now? And then I really have to ask them, okay, what exactly want to do? And then you have the whole set of regulation from the European Union, which this company has to fulfill. And that's not a problem for companies like Meta or big companies which are international with many thousands of employees. But especially in Germany, the economy is really shaped by small, medium-sized companies. And for them, that's a showstopper. That means what? This is all I have to think about before I can even test if this helps my business model. And this is very bad for an innovative framework. And it's not enabling the companies or the economy in Europe. And I think this should be the biggest shift in regulation in Europe, not to make regulation against something or someone, make regulation for enabling all the possibilities we have here on the continent, because we have all the assets, we have big industries, we have great people, we are a great market, and we are cooperating since the beginning of the internet and the digitalization in an international way. That's the DNA of the business we are all in. It was never like, okay, I'm doing my own stuff. Companies or countries who are doing that, who are just isolating themselves, you don't want to live in. Because that means we have to and we want to cooperate and get the biggest effects out of that, and especially in this area of innovation and artificial intelligence. And this is something the Commission has to understand. We need reform of the regulation, not just delay of timings or something like that. It really has to be a change of the mindset of the regulation approaches.
Matt, would you say that the UK government or other governments have compromised on things like safety and security by adopting a less, well, let's say, strict approach?
I mean, in short, no. As I said, I do think that most of the harms that we care about from AI are already, extremely well covered by existing law. I think the other thing I'd say is that I think there's a temptation when thinking about regulation to think about the scene effects. You worry about my grandmother getting ripped off by an AI, voice clone, or you worry about deepfakes impersonating people, and they're scene effects. But you don't see the unseen effects of making those rules. There's a whole set of consequences of making rules that you never observe, and so it feels like you've done a good thing, but you don't see the trade-off that you're making. And so whenever I think, when people frame these choices in terms of security or privacy or sovereignty, there is the unseen effect that actually, are we more secure if there are no European companies that are providing these services? Is it more private if all our data has to be processed elsewhere? Do we have more sovereignty if it's our rules but other people's companies? All these unseen effects, the dynamic effects of not creating an environment where innovators can thrive, I think are very, very, very painful but much less visible. And so it's very, very easy for political leaders and for rulemakers to ignore them. But I think we do that at our peril.
President Metsola in her address said that we have lots of assets here in Europe. I think we can all agree to that. Talent, science, research, deep industrial base. There is a lot of capital available. There is a single market to some degree at least. So how can we capitalize on that? How can we actually leverage the assets that we have to make a difference in the AI race that might not be focused only on the amount of capital or compute power? How can we still make a difference? And I want to hear from both of you.
I mean, I think the opportunity is so huge, and I come back to adoption again. I think Europe, and I would include the UK in this, has this sort of double-edged sword where on the one hand, there is a real risk to us that if you look at some of the most important growth industries across Europe, certainly in the UK, they're industries that will one way or another be transformed by AI. If you look at professional services, financial services, the creative industries, life sciences, manufacturing, these will be transformed by AI. The only question is whether it happens here or not. If it does, the fact that we have that existing base, that existing knowledge and talent and IP, that will be the source of competitive advantage as this AI diffusion happens. If we don't, it actually puts us in a very dangerous position where those industries will be systematically outcompeted by their peers and competitors in places that adopt faster and create the conditions for that. But there is a really positive, optimistic story here where a decade from now, look at what AI is doing in life sciences. Look at the European life sciences industry. Imagine the AI forward version of that. Some of the most miraculous cures for some of the worst diseases in the world could be invented and developed here in Europe. But that requires adoption. It requires people to believe that this is the place to do it, for the talent to aggregate here, for the capital to aggregate here. It's not too late. The assets are real. It's not that there's going to be an AI economy and then a non-AI economy. The economy is going to be an AI economy. And so the question is, can we use our existing strengths and really lean into the adoption such that we are the AI native version of those industries?
This is exactly what I meant with the transformation, and it's the beginning of the transformation. And now it's part for the politics in Europe to stand behind the companies and all the economic players who want to transform, and they have to support them. And this is the approach they have to follow by the regulation, and not to make some theoretically. Well, you mentioned now exactly the points. What this is artificial intelligence. I'm afraid of this and that. That's true, but it's already forbidden. And we are talking about an economical transformation, and therefore you need the innovation framework, which is not in the EU right now. And we talked about the AI Act now for about 5 years. And that leads to uncertainty, because since 5 years we are not talking about possibilities of AI transformation of our economy, but we are talking about the regulation and about what is forbidden and where should it be more forbidden and where's the risk. This is what we are doing since 5 years. This is the AI Act, and we are not at the end. We are still in this process, and all in our society and the economic players receiving this information. In Europe, it's difficult because even the politician makers are not at the end of the AI Act process. It's still working since 5 years. Meanwhile, in other areas, they develop the innovations and they offer it now here. And even to adopt these kind of innovations we are afraid of, or a lot of people are in the economic side are afraid of, because this uncertainty of regulations, it's a very bad signal they're giving.
I might just add one point about entrepreneurs, which is, although I spent a lot of the last 3 years working in and with government, you know, my day job and my background's all in helping people build companies, and there's a really interesting geopolitical moment for Europe and for European entrepreneurs. You know, like we heard a lot today about people going to Silicon Valley, and that is certainly a thing, and there's lots of good reasons for entrepreneurs to want to be there. But the interesting thing is, I would say that there has never been more of a sort of sense of European British patriotism from some founders. There's this real sense of like, I want to come and I want to stay. I want to stay and build for the UK. I want to stay and build for Europe. But it is harder. We shouldn't pretend we're not making those people play on hard mode. And I think more than eventually, look, I think we need to do the simplification. You know, I would love to see my own country do that as well. But the thing that we need now is the bat signal. We need political leaders to actually recognize the moment and speak directly to those founders, not appealing to them on the basis of, you know, things will get better, but actually saying, look, this is the time to build. It is a good time to build for Europe. Yes, the world is in a very strange place. There's lots of reasons why you should want to build powerful technology here. But I think founders are looking for that bat signal, and if they don't see it, they will go.
I sense the frustration, I sense the optimism, both of which are justified. I want to conclude the panel by giving you a chance to tell the policymakers maybe who are in the room right now, the next 12 months, what can they do concretely to make life better for entrepreneurs, for investors, and for anyone who's invested in this AI economy?
Stop following the way you were doing digital regulation since the last 10 years. Doing now exactly what we were talking about, giving the right signals, doing real reforms, for example, with the digital omnibus, not just a little bit here and a little bit there. Just make kind of a digital fitness check to all your regulation laws you are offering to the economy in Europe. Have a look. Do you really have to protect people with that? Then it's fine. Or is it something else you are doing? Then leave it. Get away with it. 1 in, 1 out was one approach, but maybe 1 in, 2 out, and stay behind your champions on the European continent. Give the right signals and change what you did the last 10 years concerning the regulation.
Yeah, I think that what I would say is the reason that we're in the position to be even having this conversation, the reason that Europe has its outsized position in the world, the reason that people care at all about Europe is because we embraced the last industrial revolution. That's how Europe got rich. It actually said, technology matters, we're going to go all in, we're going to be the place that invests in steam, in railways, in manufacturing, in automation. And we got that right. There was some, you know, like bits of it we wouldn't want to do again, but we got that right broadly. And that's why Europe got rich. And that's why Europe is in the place that it is today. I think that there is not enough existential fear of what happens if we don't do the same this time around. I think it's very easy to think that wealth as a continent is forever. You can draw down on that capital for a long time and feel rich, and then wake up one day and realize you're not. And my worry for my country, my worry for Europe, I think the world needs a strong Europe, is that if we don't do the sort of reforms that Alexander's talking about, we will end up taking a back seat in this transformation. And, you know, like, look at a map of the world. The countries that took a back seat on the last revolution of this scale are not the ones that are sitting around getting to decide the way that the world looks today. And that's the threat that, you know, our children, our grandchildren face if we don't change things now.
It's a fantastic note to end on, I would say. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making the trip to Brussels and to this AI Symposium. And please stay for discussions at the reception as well. Should be interesting.